Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, Colin Keating appeared on Q&A this morning and he took the government's position on the state of Palestine to task. He said that the government had made the point that one, it would make no difference if New Zealand did actually recognise the state of Palestine now, and secondly, that there were technical reasons why the state of Palestine did not conform to the minimum standards that we need for a state to exist. Those 2 points Colin Keating disagreed with, and on the first point he said that when it came to the difference that it would make, it wasn't a difference that would be made to Hamas, and it wasn't a difference that would be made to the views of Netanyahu, but the difference was this third player that wasn't mentioned by Christopher Luxon or Christopher Bishop or any of these other people from the National Party or Winston Peters, and that is the people that live in Israel, the population of Israel, and their support for Netanyahu and the Zionist right-wing regime that's in power at the moment. As you know, the people in Israel don't all support everything that Netanyahu believes, although there is a very, very suffocating media in Israel which conditions and brainwashes people and excludes information that would give them a full picture of what's really going on, what their government is really doing. There's also a lot of brainwashing about, the divine right and history of all Israelis to, take over and conquest and occupy and colonize other territories in the greater Israel, and that plan of expanding all the time, expanding into the West Bank, breaking international law, being hostile, aggressive, committing war crimes. All of this kind of stuff is going on. And the media in Israel is kind of perpetuating it, pushing it, and basically the propaganda is very, very strong there. But there are still a lot of Jewish people that actually believe in peace and don't believe in genocide and don't want war and object actually to the government that they've got. Now there's an election coming up, and Colin Keating said there's an election next year coming up, so it would make a difference if New Zealand, along with other countries, recognise the state of Palestine, because that will actually put pressure on changing the conversation, on making people within Israel say, hey, look, the whole world is now kind of getting together, they're raising their consciousness. There's a propaganda bunch of media here in Israel that hasn't been telling us the truth, and they might actually vote out Netanyahu. So this is something that Chris Bishop never mentioned this morning on Facebook when he took to Facebook and tried to reiterate some pretty weak reasoning that the National Party came up with yesterday, that it would only further the intransigent positions of Hamas, the intransigent position of Israel, if New Zealand was to actually, recognise the state of Palestine. And of course, this is like bollocks, really, Chris Bishop. Basically, they don't care what we do. They've already said, Netanyahu came to the United Nations, said, no matter what you all do, there will be no state of Palestine. And they've already moved and are committing genocide before the fact. So it was a pretty stupid kind of position that both Luxon and Bishop are trying to peddle today on social media. And yesterday, Christopher Luxon tried to use this reasoning and stumped and baffled some pretty junior reporters that didn't quite know how to respond. The other thing that when it came to the more technical objection around the conditions for a state, that we need to sit back and wait until everything's perfect. We need, the government, we need the territory, we need the population to be under control, all of these sorts of things. Colin Keating sort of said, hey, look, that may have been a good argument about 10 or 15 years ago. But today, international law has evolved a long way past the National Party or past Winston Peters. Now, as you know, Winston Peters is still harbouring back to arguments made about Iterative and versions of that from the 1930s. He hasn't updated his own history. He thinks that, the clock freezes in time. So he's doing that again. He's like taking us back like a dinosaur to an old version of international law. This is very, very convenient for Atlas Network people who are very enthusiastic about the Zionist regime, who wants to keep doing business with them. They basically completely ignore certain parts of the argument. For example, we didn't hear Luxon talking about the occupied territories in the West Bank. We didn't hear about the intention of the Israeli government to annex the West Bank, and what part that plays in the need for there to be some kind of iterative process that actually gradually around the world we all recognize the state of Palestine to prevent this annexation happening. And so Luxcon's leaving that out, so is Chris Bishop, and so are all of the National Party people. Winston Peters is as well, so is Davey Boy. So they want to omit certain parts of the argument, like, well, the influence on the Israeli population, that what New Zealand does, does get noticed. I mean, these guys have got one of their people coming out here to thank the government for supporting them. This is Israel, for supporting Israel so much in the last 2 years while they were carrying out this unfolding genocide. And that's kind of what's really pissed everybody off, is that this is not us. New Zealanders do not believe in supporting a regime that is busy doing this genocide, genocide as defined by most, like 86% of the scholars that are specialists in genocide, by the UN Commission, who have said 4 out of 5 of the conditions for genocide have been met. Now, those are kind of reputable sources, and here we have the government kind of just brushing that off as if it didn't matter in their support for the Israeli terrorism, I think, state-sanctioned terrorism and genocide. Luxcon is complicit now, so is Winston complicit. And people like Bishop, they're basically on the side of one of these sides, and they're saying, oh, well, eventually we do support recognition, but it would be it would just make things more intransigent if we were to act now. Now, Colin Keating said, hey, look, what you got to get, Chris Bishop, what you got to get, Christopher Luxcon and all you others, is the reason I disagree with you all is because it's an iterative process, this business of recognition. The more and more nations around the world who begin to actually come out and say, look, we support the state and recognize the state of Palestine, the more legitimacy that recognition gives to that state. So at the moment, I think we've got 157 nations. We've just seen 11 or 12 nations step up now and formally recognize Palestine as a state. And we're calling on everybody actually here in Auckland and in Wellington and Christchurch and Hamilton and Tauranga and up north and down south and everywhere in between to actually come out and support the state of Palestine. Do you recognise the state of Palestine? Well, I think what we should be doing is acting. Chloe Swarbrick came out this morning and said, look, the important thing here for everybody in New Zealand is to act, like get in behind this. It's not just up to politicians to actually make a statement and us to sit back and go, yes, I agree or I disagree. It's up to us. We are the people. So I'm going to start by making a statement. My name is Gerard Otto, and I recognise the state of Palestine. And I think everyone should put a small video up on their page with their name and the fact that you support the recognition of the state of Palestine. Basically, yeah, I recognise the state of Palestine. My name is Gerard Otto. That's basically it. So, yeah, I do. I recognise the state of Palestine, and I'm not happy about the idea of 3,500 more settlers moving into the West Bank soon, while we all try and turn our focus somewhere else. Now, the other point that I think that's missing in the arguments we've seen is, yes, there's a genocide that needs to be stopped. There's a ceasefire that needs to be brought about. There are proposals that have been made from many countries. There's a late proposal made by Trump that people have decided to get around and get beyond and get behind, and that's a military force going into Gaza. But ultimately, the recognition of the state of Palestine, it has to be moved up in the chain. It has to be something we do now. Let's add some constituency, let's add the legitimacy of the state, and let's make it the case that we have an impact on the people living in Israel who look to all these other nations and they say, hey, look, the United Kingdom have done this. Hey, look, France is doing this. Now Canada has said this. Now Australia have said this. Portugal have said this. And a number of other countries, Belgium. We've got New Zealand. Whoa, what's New Zealand? Oh, no, New Zealand's backing Netanyahu. So you can see how it works, and you can see what's happening here. New Zealand's been captured by a very right-wing government that doesn't represent the people. Now, Some people have argued, particularly on Al Jazeera, that what we're seeing at the moment is a wakening up of people who had actually been pretty much asleep. And this has kind of frustrated a lot of people that have been calling out for years and years. For whatever reason, populations hadn't actually gotten behind this cause. But recently we've seen populations everywhere start to wake up. And we've seen massive demonstrations, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world now walking on the streets, calling for their governments to act. And we've seen the governments go, shit, look at our constituencies at home. We better actually do something. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And this has actually pushed the people power has made the change in the level of government, and the governments have begun to do the little things that they can, which is recognize the state of Palestine, bring it forward. Don't sit, back and have that at the end of the process when it's impossible. Do it now. But our government, it thinks it can double down. It's got used to the idea that if it just keeps doubling down and keeps on holding strong to positions that are, as Marama says, morally reprehensible, then it'll all just go away, and we'll be able to bring across a whole bunch of wooden-headed, psychopathic, right-wing people who say, yes, Hamas in isolation are the bad guys and the good guys are Israel, and we demand that Hamas do everything, that we ask them to do. They need to go away, they need to fold, they need to not exist. But of course, why do they exist? What is it that made Hamas exist in the first place? So you go back and look at that, and it's a long, long history of injustice, isn't it? It's about the repeated injustice, it's the repeated silence of countries around the world in the face of that just injustice. And it's also the way in which Western nations and America and, the UK and France and company are all participating in an arms industry where they're making huge amounts of money by selling arms into Israel, spare parts into Israel. And now they're starting to talk about, well, maybe, we can recognize the state of Palestine, but we're going to keep our trade going. We're going to keep those arms rolling. So essentially the world is now waking up to the way in which governments have let us all down, and the government in New Zealand has really let us all down. And we're starting to put pressure on governments to actually stop doing trade, to start boycotting people that are, basically running an apartheid regime, running a genocidal regime, running state-sanctioned terrorism, putting about 10 or 11,000 people in prison. And nobody says a damn thing on Television New Zealand News about those 11,000 people, do they? And nobody says a damn thing about the 65,000 deaths. It's not in the Prime Minister's statement when he talks about the 251 people who were kidnapped on the 7th of October and the 48 who are still alive, 48 still missing hostages and 20 who may still be alive. The Prime Minister, Luxon, doesn't say anything about that, and no journalist in New Zealand speaks out and says, why don't you mention it? So we've got a media that's actually still pretty on side with Israel as well, pretty much into sort of apartheid, pretty much into genocide, pretty much asleep at the wheel, allowing a very unbalanced presentation from the government to just ride on through. So good on Jack for bringing on Colin Keating this morning to point out those weaknesses. One, that it may not make a difference to Netanyahu, and two, it may not be up to date to think all these conditions need to be met anymore in international law, because basically it's the population in Israel that we would make a difference to if we recognize the state of Palestine. My name is Gerard Otto, and I recognize the state of Palestine. How about you? So, yeah. Just finally, I think the other couple of things I'd like to say is what we're seeing in New York right now is thousands and thousands of people demonstrating on the streets about what's going on at the United Nations. They're saying, here's Netanyahu, he's walking amongst us. He's a wanted war criminal that has actually been indicted by the International Criminal Court, and he's walking amongst us. He's allowed to speak at the United Nations. That organization has allowed him to actually walk in there and speak, when really what should be happening is he should be arrested by people. He should be arrested, but you've got Trump, you've got these congressmen, and they're all kind of giving standing ovations to Netanyahu, the war criminal, indicted by the International Court, Criminal Court. So, what's going on in New Zealand, that's what's going on, and we need to change it, and it starts with us. So why don't you guys all get out there and take some action? either buy a t-shirt that says, you know, I recognise the state of Palestine, or make a video and put it up on your page, or actually do a meme, whatever it takes. I recognise the state of Palestine. Send that message to our government today, and for goodness sake, this has got to be one of those terrible moments where we're all so shocked and horrified. This is not our government, this is not who we are, they are not us. Vote them out, New Zealand. That's all I have to say.
Welcome to G News, the good news.